What if I told you that some of the biggest names in entertainment weren't just performers, but witnesses? Witnesses to something much deeper, something most people never see. Because for years, Dave Chappelle has been dropping hints, not loud, not obvious, but enough to make you pause, enough to make you wonder. And then there's Jim Carrey, a man who went from being one of Hollywood's most funniest faces to one of its most uncomfortable truth-tellers.
I was sickened. I was sickened by the standing ovation. I felt like Hollywood is just spineless, en masse.
And right in the middle of all of this, whether people want to admit it or not, is Michael Jackson. A man who wasn't just famous, he was powerful. A man who wasn't just talented, he was aware. And then there's Oprah Winfrey, one of the most trusted voices in media, the woman millions believed, followed, and respected for decades. But here's the twist. What if the story we've all been told isn't the full story? What if the warnings weren't random? And what if, in their own ways, Dave Chappelle and Jim Carrey have been pointing back to something Michael Jackson understood long before the rest of the world caught on?
The media, man, it is one hell of an entity. It really can have you thinking that the bad people are good and the good people are bad.
Because once you connect the dots, things start to feel very different. Not louder, just clearer. To understand how all of this connects, you have to go back to a time before the controversies, before the interviews, before the public debates. Back to when Michael Jackson wasn't just a global icon, but a man navigating a world most people could never imagine. Michael grew up in the spotlight. From a young age, he was surrounded by fame, money, and power. But unlike many child stars, he didn't just stay in the role of performer. He evolved, he learned, he paid attention.
Throughout the years, Black artists have been taken advantage of. Yeah. It's time now that we have to put a stop to this incredible injustice.
And over time, he became something rare in the entertainment industry, someone who understood how it worked behind the scenes. He wasn't just signing contracts, he was reading them. He wasn't just making music, he was owning it. And that kind of awareness, it changes things.
Yes, and Tony Mottola, the president of the record division, is a meme, he's a racist, and he's very, very, very devilish.
Because when you understand how power operates, you start to notice patterns. You start to see who really controls what and who doesn't. At the same time Oprah Winfrey was building her empire, she wasn't just a talk show host, she was becoming a cultural force. People trusted her, they believed her. When she spoke, millions listened. And for a while, it seemed like these two powerful figures, Michael and Oprah, were part of the same world, just moving in different ways.
I believe that they gave me a raw deal because this industry is a monster. It's the same monster that these Me Too was trying to tell you about. But they hate the monster for how it, and I hate that monster for how it eats. But my God, man, it's the same monster.
But what nobody expected was how their paths would cross, and more importantly, how those moments would later be viewed in a completely different light. Because at the time, it looked like a simple interview, but years later, people started asking questions. Then you have Dave Chappelle, a comedian, yes, but also someone who walked away from everything at the peak of his career. Fame, money, success, he stepped back from all of it.
When I quit my show, they said I was crazy. What was crazy about it? I just didn't want to do it anymore.
And everybody calls me crazy. You know, I mean, it was just...
You're hearing on the news things like he's gone crazy, which that doesn't sound right, you know? And
well, you know, maybe I know stuff people don't want me to talk about. So
right.
we're going to what other people believe. So they'll call me crazy.
And when he came back, he wasn't the same. His jokes had layers. His words carried weight. He wasn't just making people laugh anymore. He was making them think. He talked about the industry in ways that felt uncomfortable. He described it like something bigger than just entertainment, like a system. And then there's Jim Carrey, another man who had everything: fame, wealth, recognition, and yet at a certain point, he started speaking differently too. Not like a typical celebrity, more like someone who had seen something and couldn't unsee it. He spoke about control, about illusion, about how people in powerful positions shape narratives.
Father, Dr. Evan Chandler, did in fact drug his child into making the allegation about Michael Jackson.
At first, people laughed it off, but then more clips surfaced, more interviews, more moments where both men, completely separate from each other, seemed to be describing the same kind of environment. And that's when people started looking back at Michael Jackson differently. Because here's where things start to get complicated.
There were no more allegations against Michael Jackson until almost 10 years later, when suddenly there was an explosion of allegations against Michael Jackson. And I want you to remember that year, 2003.
Michael Jackson didn't just live in the spotlight, he challenged it. There were moments where he openly spoke about the music industry, about contracts, about how artists were treated. He wasn't vague about it either. He named names. He called out systems.
I did not consider myself to be a friend of his. And I didn't want to be one of those people showing up just because it's Michael Jackson. So no, I didn't, because I was not a friend. I was someone who had interviewed him and at the time really had a lot of compassion for him. And those feelings about him changed over the years.
And when someone at that level starts doing that, it doesn't go unnoticed. But here's the part that makes people uncomfortable: the timing. Every time Michael got louder, something else seemed to get louder too. Stories, headlines, narratives. And suddenly, the focus wasn't on what he was saying anymore, it was on who he was as a person.
First off, Oprah and Harvey have been friends for over 2 decades. A lot of people use the argument that she didn't know about what he was doing, but that's impossible because everyone's known about Harvey Weinstein's reputation ever since the 90s.
Now, let's bring Oprah back into the picture, because her interview with Michael Jackson was one of the most watched television moments ever. Millions tuned in. It was supposed to be a chance for people to understand him better, and at first it seemed like that's what it was. But over time, people began to question how that interview shaped public perception. Not all at once, not immediately, but slowly.
Students were handpicked by Oprah to go and live at this academy, and one of these employees who is managing the dorm is physically touching them and doing things to them and harming them.
Because years later, Oprah would take a very different stance when it came to Michael Jackson, and that shift didn't go unnoticed. At the same time, Dave Chappelle was talking about how the industry labels people, how quickly someone can go from respected to ridiculed, from powerful to dismissed. And Jim Carrey was talking about how narratives are created, how public opinion isn't always organic, it's often guided. And when you listen to all three perspectives together, it starts to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern. Now let's get into the heart of it, because this isn't just about interviews or opinions, it's about perception and how easily it can be shaped.
Congress finally twisted Trump's arm and passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which requires the Department of Justice to publish in a searchable and downloadable format all unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials in DOJ's possession that relate to the investigation and prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein. So it's literally now the law.
Dave Chappelle once described the entertainment industry as something that builds people up and then tears them down. Not always for obvious reasons. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes it's about who steps out of line. And Jim Carrey echoed something similar. He talked about how certain individuals, especially those who can't be easily controlled, become problems. Not because they've done something wrong, but because they don't fit the mold. Now, think about Michael Jackson in that context. He was independent. He owned his work. He had influence that went beyond music, and most importantly, he spoke his mind. That combination, it's powerful, but it's also risky.
His image is being dropped in this document and photo dump with no clear indication of what crimes he might be implicated in. Something I'm sure the Trump administration just presumed people weren't really going to think of given Jackson's history of accusations.
Because in a system built on control, unpredictability is dangerous. Now, here's where Oprah's role becomes part of the conversation, not as an accusation, but as a presence. Because she wasn't just an outsider looking in, she was deeply connected to the industry. She had relationships, influence, access. And when someone like that takes a public stance on something, it carries weight, a lot of weight.
Trump and the DOJ clearly got caught with their pants down here, tried to remove this picture, but then ended up posting it back up after the public outcry in reaction to its removal, claiming this picture being taken down had nothing to do with Trump or politics.
So when she shifted her position regarding Michael Jackson, it didn't just feel like a personal opinion. To many people, it felt like something bigger. And that's where the conversation started to change.
Same monster that these Me Too was trying to tell you about. But they hate the monster for how it, and I hate that monster for how it eats. But my God, man, it's the same monster.
Because now it wasn't just about what Michael Jackson did or didn't do. It was about how the story around him was told, who told it, and why. At the same time, Dave Chappelle continued to make subtle references to how narratives are constructed. He talked about how quickly people can be labeled crazy once they stop playing along. And Jim Carrey pointed out how easily audiences accept those labels without questioning them. So now you have three perspectives.
I was sickened. I was sickened by the standing ovation. I felt like Hollywood is just spineless, en masse. And it really felt like, oh, this is a really clear indication that we're not the cool club anymore.
Michael Jackson speaking from inside the system, Dave Chappelle walking away and observing from the outside, Jim Carrey analyzing it from a philosophical angle, and all of them, in different ways, describing something that feels connected. The emotional impact of all this is heavier than people realize, because at the center of it isn't just a celebrity story, it's a human story.
Our partners are under certain scrutiny right now that would erase all the history that person had done.
Gotcha.
And I was a part of that history.
Gotcha.
So almost in this moment, it's like, damn.
Michael Jackson wasn't just a performer, he was a person navigating immense pressure, constant scrutiny, and a world where every move was watched. Imagine trying to speak out about something you believe in while the entire world is already forming opinions about you. Imagine feeling like no matter what you say, it won't be heard the way you intend. That kind of isolation, it changes you. And for Dave Chappelle, walking away from fame wasn't just about money. It was about protecting himself, protecting his mind, his identity.
Saw that documentary, I realized that a lot of people are going to be triggered by watching it, and a lot of people will not understand what the pattern is. Winfrey explained, people call it but there is a big seducing that goes on, and that was important enough for me to take the hateration for.
Jim Carrey, in his own way, went through a similar transformation. He stepped back, he reflected, he started questioning everything. And when you look at all three journeys together, you see a pattern of people who reached the top and then started pulling away, not because they failed, but because they saw something they couldn't ignore. And that's what makes this story hit differently, because it's not just about what happened, it's about what it felt like to be inside it. And now, we come to the part that leaves people thinking long after the video ends, because this story doesn't have a clean conclusion. It doesn't tie everything up with a neat explanation. Instead, it leaves questions, real questions. Why do certain narratives stick while others disappear? Why do some voices get amplified while others get dismissed? And why do people like Dave Chappelle and Jim Carrey, two completely different individuals, end up describing the same kind of system? But more importantly, why does Michael Jackson's story still feel unfinished?
Did you ever waver in your beliefs when the documentary director came out and said there was a timeline issue, Michael Jackson didn't have the train station?
Maybe it's because the truth isn't always simple. Maybe it's because the entertainment industry is more complex than we think. Or maybe it's because some stories aren't meant to be fully understood right away. They unfold over time, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. And now, here we are, years later, still talking about it, still questioning, still trying to connect the dots. Because whether you believe everything, some of it, or none of it, one thing is clear. The way we see celebrities, the way we understand fame, the way we consume stories, it's all shaped by something bigger than just headlines.
I'm supposed to do this in my business. I'm up here doing something that nobody else in this business has the balls to do. I'm telling you something that you need to know.
And maybe, just maybe, the real story isn't about exposing anyone. It's about learning how to see, to question, to think for yourself. Because once you start doing that, you don't just watch the story anymore. You understand it. And once you understand it, you can't unsee it.